So let's look at this particular learning outcome that we're going to be studying today, which is primarily to be learning outcome 5. And what we want to be able to do is in this learning outcome, we are looking at being able to produce an academic report. So if I just quickly switch you guys over to the creative content. So this is what we're looking at covering today. And I would suggest, some of you, if you have your microphones switched on, for now, if you can mute them. And obviously, when you're asking questions or participating, you can obviously put them back on. I don't need specifically the video in some cases, but yeah, if you want to participate with the video on, that is absolutely acceptable as well. But just keep your microphones muted so that there is less of background noise. And obviously, as the sessions are being recorded, so if some of the learners need to refer to it again, that background noise is to be, not coming when your mics are muted. So that's great. Thank you for doing that. Now, what we are looking at doing today is, before we start today's session, which is going to be predominantly on understanding, how to produce an academic piece of report. So in the last learning outcome, we essentially looked at, when I say the last learning outcome. So good morning, everyone. Just recording the session now. In the last learning outcome that we covered in this particular unit, which is academic and research skills, we were looking at studying learning outcome 4. And here is where we understood how to create a draft research plan. So I shared a template with some of you, and this particular template primarily was provided so that you are able to fill it in to create a research proposal. And this research proposal would have certain key elements of your research plan that would include your aims and objectives. If some of you recall, you can participate. That includes, the rationale of research. We were looking at also writing down a few sources from which you're going to be carrying out a review of the existing, research, say, for example, evidence of existing research which has happened in that field. And that is generally termed as what is called literature review. You're also looking at, so here, because it's level 3 and we are trying to understand how academic research is done, how academic writing is done to produce reports. And in some cases, you'll be looking at doing assignments. So the main idea here is to study and understand how do we go about developing our research skills. And in development of these research skills, the idea was to try and go through a process wherein you'll understand what are the various techniques of research, primary and secondary, in some cases tertiary. How do we go about carrying primary research, carrying out primary research, secondary research? What are the main techniques or tools through which we carry out primary and secondary research? And at level 3, we are specifically focused on carrying out what is called desk-based research or secondary research. That means you're going to be looking into compiling a report which is based on evidence which is already published in the public domain, either on reports, journals, articles, previously published research reports for the topic that you select. And we had discussed 2 specific websites that you would go on to. One is the NHS Scotland website, and the other is Health Foundation, which has lots of different types of reports which are published every year. And they look into providing a suitable let's say a topic that you can shortlist and then do your research or prepare your research proposal in that format. Now, I'd also shared a particular template with you guys. This template was predominantly looking at giving you a steer in the direction that, okay, rather than we have various different forms of, ways that you would need to look at creating in terms of how do I go about doing the research, or what are the areas that I need to cover. So what I shared with all of you was that a template that we could use primarily to look at creating this research proposal. Now, I don't know how many of you recall, but we were looking at this particular template. So I'm just going to share my whole screen, which is going to be slightly easier for you to view. So we were looking at basically this particular template, which I've opened up now on the screen. This. So this is the particular template which I was talking about in terms of, you going out and filling it in. And this particular template then allows you essentially to, write down the bare basics of how you're going to be going about doing your research. Now, it included things like, your aim and objective, your title of your research. So you need to fill maximum of 2 objectives. What is the purpose or your rationale of research? Then we were looking at why are you focusing on this particular topic? What are the key areas of interest? Broader significance of what essentially you're looking at uncovering when you look at reading into the literature, and obviously looking at doing this research. And then we were looking at understanding what could be the 5 or 6 different sources which you would look at referring to in terms of compiling that data. So here we are not going to go about and do an actual literature review, which is to study the existing or published research or various sources in which the reports have been published. You would then go about reading it and then summarize it in the broad points that are related to your research topic. But what we want to essentially do here is list down a few sources from which you are going to be looking at gathering that evidence or that data. And then in terms of methodology, we need to briefly mention what research methodology you're going to use. Are you going to go primary? Primary, we are trying to avoid because it needs you to do or take up field-based tasks, things like getting questionnaires filled, surveys filled, doing interviews, focus group interviews or discussions, which predominantly at this level would not be possible. Sometimes it can be done. Most of you are on LinkedIn, Facebook, you have your own social networks, and you can also create a questionnaire and post it on one of your social networks and ask your friends and colleagues to participate. But sometimes we have to look at ethical considerations in terms of finding out whether the participants are consenting with providing this information, and then the information collected needs to be anonymized. That means you need to make sure personal details of the participants are not shared when you're writing a report. So in order to avoid those complications, we're going to be looking at desk-based research or secondary research. You're going to list down again sources of information or references that you're going to pick up in terms of your research report. And this is what I shared, that either of the reports and the websites that you go to, and when you scroll down to the last of your report, you will always see a list of references. So the topic and the objectives that you are covering, because some of these research reports, even published on the Health Foundation, the NHS website, are quite extensive and detailed. So in this case, the idea was to try and look at narrowing down on the objective that you're going to be studying from that report. And with that in mind, list down the sources of information or references essentially from that shortlist and put some here. What is the expected conclusion that you're going to draw? And that is to be mentioned here. And then what were the ethical considerations for carrying out that research, which is normally given in that report, is what I would expect you to list down as bullet points here. Now, when you have done this, there was a bit of a steer given to understand that how much do we need to write in the proposal. So introduction is about 30 to 50 words, aims and objectives, you're restricting to 1 or 2. Rationale of the research is again 30 to 50 words. Literature review, we are not carrying that out. We are listing down the sources of information or the sources like books, articles, journals, websites that you're going to be looking at collecting data from. Research methodology hinted at. Let's pick up secondary and keep that to secondary research. And then how would you go about presenting an information which is going to be in the form of graphs, tables, maybe paraphrasing the report that you've downloaded, and then attach that report with the assignment towards the end, because we would like to reference that report that you've picked out. And then the important bits which are related to the objectives that you've chosen, how would you do it? You would need to paraphrase and write those in your own words and include the ethical considerations which are relevant to those objectives, and then references, and that would essentially, compile this particular report. Now, this was the proposal, and that was in task 3. Now, when we go to learning outcome 5, so 4 was related to task 3, which said draft a research plan and a piece of research. So this is where you would go about doing it by filling up this particular proposal, which I would bring it here for the reference so that you are clear. And then in 5, which is what we are looking at covering today in terms of learning outcome 5, we are essentially looking at getting into writing that piece of research. So you have the report, assuming you've downloaded a piece of report. Did you mute your microphones, please? So essentially what you're looking at is, you're essentially looking at, writing that piece of research today or report from the topic that you have shortlisted, from the research report that you have shortlisted, and about that specific topic with the key objectives in mind, which are given on this research proposal. So that is what we're going to discuss today in Learning Outcome 5, which is produce a final piece of academic work. And it has 3 assessment criteria, one on pass, one on merit, one on distinction. One is the pass criteria is to produce a report, basis your research proposal, which is this that you have compiled. Now, basis this research proposal, you will write a 200 to 250 word report, and that would essentially achieve 5.1. In 5M1, which is the merit criteria, this report that you produce is going to be used to do what is called a viva. That means you're going to be presenting the key findings of this report to us using a Zoom session, and that would achieve merit. Now, in the distinction task, you are expected to present this report to an audience like we're doing a session today. So some of you, when you're ready with your reports and you've produced it, what you're going to be doing is essentially we're going to be having a session like this towards the end, which will be called the assignment discussion session. Each of you will be allocated about 5 to 7 minutes. And what you would be looking at doing is, if you're looking at achieving the higher grades, which is merit and distinction, then in those cases, you're going to be looking at presenting what you have done, how you've gone about doing the research, what data you've collected, what have you understood in terms of the aims and objectives of the research, and then what is the evidence that you have produced. You're going to be sharing that with an audience, in this case, other learners, and that would be achieving distinction. So we are going to be focused on today Learning Outcome 5. We will go through a few bit of slides to discuss what we are doing. But before that, what I want to essentially do is check your knowledge in terms of what we have studied so far. So what I want to do in this case is primarily look at doing a quiz. And that quiz that we are going to do is going to be basically based on maybe multiple choice questions, but the idea is to, do this quiz to check your understanding in terms of what is research, what is academic writing. And what I want to do is essentially focus on the topic of academic writing today, because this is an important topic. Reason being, you're going to be using this technique that you're learning in this unit to be able to do assignments in the future. And this would require academic writing. Academic writing means that when you do academic writing, essentially you are looking at essentially getting into the habit of referencing your work. You're getting into the habit of essentially, let's put it this way, paraphrasing bits and pieces of your work. And this would then be useful because they will allow you to reference and credit relevant people as and when you write something for the submission of assignments or creation of reports. So before we just do the quiz, let's look at briefly, some of the bits that I want to take you through in terms of, academic writing. So let's briefly, go through 1 or 2 things on the slide, and then we'll get onto this quiz to get an idea in terms of how good is your understanding on this particular topic of academic writing, and obviously looking at compiling a piece of research. So today it is Learning Outcome 5, as I mentioned. What we want to be able to do is primarily look at producing an academic piece of report or a research report. Now, when we look at Learning Outcome 5, what we want to be able to do is, when I say you need to be able to produce an academic work which is professionally presented and drafted, what are the key things that we have to keep in mind when I say you are going to be presenting it in a formal style? Academic writing means you're looking at writing, creating a report using the formal style of writing, which is what will be referencing work, which will include, for example, bits of writing which will be backed up by statistics, by evidence, and that is where you would need to use referencing or give credit to authors essentially when you are looking at producing this piece of work. Now, what is meant by academic writing? If I look at just the definition of it, or if I have to ask you a question, what is meant by academic writing? How would you go about explaining what is academic writing? Anyone? What is academic writing? So if I look at the process of academic writing, feel free to unmute your microphones or use the chat window to be able to message. But what I want to understand is, if anybody could tell me, what do they understand by academic writing? Okay, academic, anybody knows the meaning of the word academic? What is the meaning of the word academic? So academic relates to education. Academic essentially relates to a piece of work or some sort of work being produced, which is educated related to education in nature. So academic could also mean something which is relating to scholarship when you go into study in uni or school, or concepts which are theoretical concepts, but they are backed up by some sort of research. So in most cases, when we look at referring the term or refer to the term which is academics, it is generally a theoretical or a hypothetical situation wherein you are going to be asked questions, and these questions are essentially going to be based, the answers to these questions will essentially be based on some sort of theoretical or hypothetical assumptions, and they would become the basis of what is called the academic, say in this case, research. Academic also means scholarly. That means, you're essentially considering something which has been produced by somebody who's a scholar, and that is why the work produced would be also called scholarly work. And in this case, a teacher, as an example, a simple example, if I'm your teacher and I end up writing or producing a report, like in the schools, we produce a report card, then you would generally say, and this grades being awarded by the teacher to the students will generally be, what are called academic grades. And this is where, this would be, termed as academic. Now, when I talk about academic writing, basically, this is a formal style of writing. So formal style of writing, which is used in universities, in scholarly publications, articles, journals, and you would generally encounter this form of writing, which is expected when you write essays, when you create or write research papers, or when you write dissertations or research reports, which are large research reports conducted after field or primary research, or combination of research techniques, and they are produced for the let's say for the consumption of the members of public, then they would be termed as reports which are produced using formal style of writing, and that would be termed as academic writing. Now, there are different forms of academic writing. This is something that is coming from pure English. If I was to give you an English session and talk about English writing in particular as a component, generally there are 4 different types of styles of writing. And these 4 types tend to be descriptive, analytical, persuasive, and critical. So sometimes when you read assignment briefs and you generally see what is being discussed in the assignment, you would normally see that in certain assignments, there are command verbs which talk about critically analyze, critically evaluate. So when we talk about the styles of writing, you would need to look at, doing critical evaluation. That means present arguments, disadvantages, advantages, pros and cons. And that would be critical style of writing, wherein you are trying to back the data and present something as a concept which is backed up by, essentially, arguments or, assumptions which have been proven in that field, predominantly if it's healthcare in this case, there have been, extensive research which has been carried out, and that is why you're presenting the for and against arguments to do a critical evaluation. Now, when we look at styles of writing and how do we write, sometimes we use persuasive style, sometimes we use journalistic style, sometimes we use analytical style, sometimes we use descriptive style. Can you think of a style in terms of where do you see descriptive style of writing? Any ideas, any guesses, descriptive style of writing? Yes, Ghazala, you mentioned it correctly. Yes, the word academic is formal writing. That's correct. Any ideas in terms of when we say descriptive style of writing, where do we see descriptive style of writing? I'll give you a hint. Every one of us have bought goods or products at any given point in time. So the user manuals that you get along with your new iPhone or a toaster that you buy or a washing machine that you have or a refrigerator that you buy or any such product that you buy, and you have a user manual which comes along with it, that is generally written in a descriptive style because it has some pictures, some headings, it shows some diagrams, it shows and tells you exactly how you need to go about using the product. And why it is descriptive in nature? Because it is describing the things that you would need to do to make the appliance work. Similarly, you have analytical, persuasive, critical styles. We'll not go into the English session today in terms of English style of writing. So the idea here is to focus on what is academic style of writing and what could be some examples. So when we talk about academic writing, keep this in mind. Very good reports. Yes, Damilola, that is correct. There are reports. So data or information that is produced in using formal style of writing, wherein when I say formal style of writing, you mean this style of writing uses third party language. That means I don't use I, we, and you, and we use third party language to be able to write and refer to something. And in producing these reports, this would be generally an academic style of writing. Now, it would also include language features. It will also include referencing, and it will also include different styles of writing. Sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do, is create a convincing proposition. So you're going to be persuasive in your writing style. If you're trying to give information but also back it up with data, then your style of writing would typically be a little analytical as well as persuasive. And in some cases, when you look at certain books that we read or certain chapters of the book that we read, we have to follow them as instructions. And in those cases, you generally see that style of writing being a bit descriptive. Now, when we look at reports, when we look at any sort of literature review, critique of any sort of report which has been published, they would all be done in a formal language, and that would be termed as academic style of writing. Now, the most important piece of information sometimes the author or the publisher wants you to know is through a concept or written in a particular paragraph in a way wherein some of these words are taken as it is from the author's publication or original data when it has been published, and they sometimes need to be included in what are called direct quotes, and that style of writing would be direct quotes. Now, when you read something and you write it in your own words, now in those cases you're looking at paraphrasing, but without having to change the meaning of the context, and that would generally be also academic writing. So in some cases, when I look at theoretical frameworks, if I ask you the definition of, say, the person-centered approach and how it was brought across by the American psychologist Carl Rogers. Now, when you have to bring that across in your assignment, you would generally say the person-centered approach was introduced by psychiatrist Carl Rogers in the early 1960s, an American psychologist, and this approach, blah, blah, blah. Now, when you write and reproduce the text as it is, which is coming from how it was published or created by the author, then you are using direct quotes. And this style of writing would then generally tend to be academic style of writing. But if you read that paragraph and then you write it in your own words, then in those cases, what you are looking at is you're basically, without changing the meaning of the word, essentially conveying the meaning in your own words. And that would be generally, paraphrasing. That means you've read something, but you've written it in your own words. But when I look at paraphrasing and direct quotes, they are both within the academic style of writing. They use a formal tone. You have done your research in a way wherein the data that you've collected or the data or evidence that you're presenting in the report or in your assignment is backed up by research. It uses third person's point of view. There's a clear focus that you're trying to build in on the topic that you're talking about. You're not beating around the bush. You're very clearly talking about the topic. Your words that you're using are precise, and the writing that you're doing is very concise related to the topic. It has very close adherence to an appropriate formal structure of writing. And in most cases, wherever you are bringing in other other, when I say other authors' work, then in those cases, what you're looking at doing is you're also using citations or referencing to ensure that you're giving credit to the authors who have essentially created that piece of report. Now, when I talk about academic writing, a particular, piece of work which I would want to, bring in and show you would generally be, let's say, a picture which could summarize this. But if I try and get a clear part of it in terms of, how this would be, this is something that you would use. So if I put this across and say that this is how you would look at doing academic writing, it would include some of these things which I have shown you on the slide now. And that would mean that, as long as you're including all these as a part of your report, then this would be considered as academic writing. So what are the features of academic writing? If I have to summarize what we've quickly discussed, is that it is precise, it is balanced, it is objective, it is formal, it is structured, it is evidencing, the bits that you're including in your report by looking at referencing to reports or statistics, and then you're including citations sometimes, and then you're presenting arguments which are going to do or provide both pros and cons, both sides of the coin, and that would be being critical in terms of producing some of these reports. Now, various types that all of you have mentioned, reports is one type of academic writing, or uses formal styles of writing. Essay writing is one of them. Dissertations is one of them. Scholarly articles, journals which are produced are also written in an academic format. And the reason why they are academic is because they have a very clear structure. They tend to be evidencing the material. There are balancing of arguments which are done, which are based on, producing and providing, both sides of the coin, which is advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons, positives and negatives, and things like that. And then the style of writing tends to be in the third person point of view. So we avoid using I, we, me, you. We use a third person's point of view in writing most of these, statements and reports, and that tends to be the communication of ideas, information, and research from a wider, academic fraternity. And this then tends to, be referred to as what is called academic writing. Examples of this: when you read books, when you read articles, when you read reports, when you read essays, they are all written in an academic form of writing, which have a very formal style of English language, and they have a very clear structure to it, so that when you read them and you read the reports, there's a proper introduction, there is aims and objectives, there is there's a method which has been defined for why the research has been carried out. There are conclusions which are drawn, recommendations which are made, and then towards the end you have what is called a concluding part of that report, and that generally consists of what is called the structured form of writing the report. Now, what I want to do is basically to test where you are with regards to your ability to be able to academically write. What I want to do essentially is look at doing a quiz. And that quiz primarily is we do about 10 questions, and those 10 questions, would typically be, let's say, looking at giving us some idea in terms of, whether we understand what is academic writing or not. And this is something which I've just, going to be doing, because what I want to look at your existing areas in terms of your skills currently, to see whether you understand when we talk about academic writing and academic writing skills, what they are, and how they need to be done or referenced. Now, this is a skill. So essentially, for some of you, if you feel that this is something that you don't have knowledge of and you have not come across this before, then the idea there would be to primarily look at developing this skill. And this can be developed by reading and practicing referencing, and then trying to write from a third person's point of view. And this would help you develop this particular process of what is called academic writing. So if we are to start this quiz, it is probably going to be 10 questions. And what we want to be able to do in these 10 questions is get answers from everyone, so that as long as we have a consensus, we'll discuss this. And then what we are going to do is primarily, discuss why it is the case or why it is not the case, so that everybody is able to follow in terms of, whether this is correct or this is not correct. So let me just quickly organize this quiz. So I'm going to bring this out as a Word document on our screen. And they are going to be just 10 questions in and around, the process of what is academic writing. So let's start, and we'll format this as we go along. I don't want to look at taking too much time, and as we go along, we can, format these questions with regards to, looking at the right answers. So if you give me a second, and I would look at changing and sharing this. So let's look at this bit now. Okay. So if you unmute your microphones and participate, that will be great. So I hope everyone is able to see these Q&A session questions, which I've just compiled, and they are going to be looking at testing your academic, writing skills. So what we want to do is understand, do we understand this particular topic? What do we mean by academic writing? And can we relate to then differentiate between what is academic writing and what is, informal, what is formal style of writing and what is informal style of writing. So just about nearly there with regards to this. And we will make a start. So 10 questions is what we are looking at. And let's look at, there are no right and wrong answers. Let me put it this way. So the idea here would be to have everyone participate and put their viewpoints. If you choose a particular answer, feel free to explain why you've chosen this. And then we will look at what is the correct answer for that particular question or that, statement. So we're nearly there, and let's start off. Okay, so let's look at this particular bit, which is the first question, which talks about, the purpose of closing sentence is. What is the purpose of the closing sentence? Is everyone able to see this clearly? I can magnify this slightly as well if you want to make it slightly more bigger. Okay, let's look at what is the purpose of a closing sentence. Any ideas? What is the purpose of a closing sentence?
It redefines the introduction, sir.
That is correct. So if we look at the purpose of a closing statement, sometimes we get to see, in the courts, lawyers making a closing statement, or the judge inviting, or the counsel inviting the barrister or the, party being represented by a lawyer or a solicitor. They ask them to come in and make a closing statement. So a closing statement generally tends to be, the last sentence or the last topic or the verdict, which is what summarizes the main idea which is being discussed or spoken about or being written about, in this case, in the academic report. So a closing sentence is a paragraph essentially which would be telling us, what is the context of the discussion that we are doing or the report that you're writing. So in this case, the option A says it reminds the reader of topic and keeps them thinking, redefines the introduction, it provides detail about the topic, it lets us know what paragraph is going to be about. So which option is correct?
Option B, sir, by Cynthia.
It redefines introduction. How many of you will agree with option B? So I've got two people which have said option B, but generally speaking, when you say option B and what we've discussed in terms of what is a closing sentence, it tends to be the concluding sentence or a paragraph which is written, which summarizes what the information is going to be. So it redefines the introduction, or it lets us know what paragraph is going to be about. Is it B or is it D? So it is D or is it B? I think it is more of D, because a concluding sentence in academic writing tends to be indicating that you are bringing the topic to a close, and it summarizes what has been discussed in the paragraph, and that is why I would say it more resembles B. Now, when I say an opening sentence, that would be to reassure or probably reference the introduction. But I'm talking about a closing sentence here. So in this case, the option is going to be, I think, D, which tells us what is the paragraph going to be about. And it is kind of summarizing and bringing the discussion to a close, wherein what you're asking the reader to do is identify what are the key points that have been discussed. And what you're doing is re-emphasizing on those key points to be able to bring that discussion to a close in a paragraph or in a report, in one of the paragraphs within the report. Now, a good topic sentence should always be, what does this mean? When you start a topic or a discussion, when you start an introduction, what is a good topic sentence going to be? Boring, detailed, interesting, or long?
Interested.
Excellent. Yeah. So I would also agree that it is going to be interesting. Anybody else begs to differ?
Interesting.
You can also type your answers to the chat room. Okay. Now, a good topic sentence is going to be specific enough to give a very clear sense of what you can expect to read in the report, or maybe in a paragraph or on a page. And this in general does not give away the whole concept. So it's like a book. When you pick up a novel, or when you're trying to pick up something to read, what you're going to do is do an introduction or a good topic sentence, as I would say. And this topic sentence is going to be looking at creating interest, igniting some bit of interest in the readers to say that this is what all you can expect in the report to cover. And what you're trying to do is trying to engage with the readers, engage with your audience. And what you're trying to do essentially is not give away everything, but you're trying to make it interesting for somebody to pick up that book or that cover. So it's like when you go to W.H. Smith or you go to any of the stores and you are wanting to buy a Harry Potter book, what you do is you basically look at picking up the book and you read just the first page, or you turn the book around and towards the end you read just the summary of the book in terms of what all it contains. So that is an example of a good topic sentence, because J.K. Rowling here is not going to give away the entire story in terms of what you're going to read in the book. She's going to make it interesting by creating a bit of a plot, and that is what a good sentence would be. Now, there are three parts to a paragraph. What are the three parts to a paragraph? Anybody?
C, topic sentence, body,
Yes,
and then closing sentence, sir.
that is correct. So this is quite simple enough to answer. So when we look at three parts to a paragraph, it's like you're telling a story. When you're writing a letter or a formal letter of, letter to a council, to a school, to make a complaint, or whatever you're doing as a formal letter, you have three parts to the letter. You have an opening paragraph, you have a middle paragraph, which is talking about the detail, what you want in terms of resolution, or what is it that you are actually asking about. And towards the end, you have a closing paragraph or a closing sentence in that letter, which will basically look like a story. So start, mid, and beginning. So here, the three parts of the paragraphs are essentially going to be the topic sentence. It is going to be looking at giving you a bit of detail or detailing, which is going to be the body, and then you have a concluding sentence or a closing sentence. So C is going to be the most appropriate, answer for this particular question. So does everybody agree, or does, so I think 4 is a fourth. So I think fourth. So A was correct. That's fine, Masood. Thank you for that. Number 3 option was okay. Interesting. Nafisa, thank you. So we are in the third question now, 3 parts of the paragraph, and they would be that you generally have an opening sentence or a topic sentence, which is the headline, the main part of it, the body, and then you have a closing sentence. Now, academic writing has to be, we've already discussed, and I've given you a bit of a summary in terms of what is academic writing. Academic writing has to be using
Formal and unbiased by Cynthia, sir.
That is correct. So this is a simple one. Does everybody agree? Anybody has a different opinion or a different answer? So academic writing, as I mentioned to you earlier, is written in third person's point of view. It has a formal structure of writing. So when I say a formal structure, that is there. We don't use informal, so this option is out. Full of information is quite generic. Obviously, if it is a descriptive style and you're reading a user manual for a phone or a TV or a microwave or a washing machine, it'll be full of information. So this is a generic answer. Unfocused, without a structure, will not be the case, because we are talking about formal style of writing. And when you use third person's point of view, you're going to be putting statements across in an unbiased fashion or a manner. And then, it is going to be, formal and unbiased. Now, a research paper is an in-depth investigation based on independent research. Is it true or false?
True.
Absolutely correct.
True.
Everybody agrees to this? Everybody agrees to this? Yes, so a research paper which has been produced, but how it has been produced, using primary or secondary techniques. You've gone across, asked a lot of questions to your sample size, you've collected that information, analyzed that information, you have tabulated, and then created that information as a bit of a, come to some sort of a conclusion with that summary. And this is all based on in-depth investigation. And it is going to be something which will present the facts in black and white. And that is why you would generally say that, this would be, academic writing would be, in terms of academic writing or a research report that you're going to produce is going to be based on investigation. And that is where you would generally say that, yes, it is true. Now, next one, what should you never do when writing an essay? What would you consider? So here, one of the best ways to answer this question would be to start negating out answers. What you should never do when writing an essay. Not mentioning the research topic in introduction. Stay away from question and discussion. Not providing references. Provide quotes that are not related to the main topic. What you should never do. So here we are looking at negating the answers first. 5 things or 4 things or some of the things that you don't do when you're writing an essay. What is it that it is going to be?
Not mentioning the research topic in the introduction, sir.
Okay, so all these bits, would be something that we will never do. They are all correct answers, but which is the most incorrect answer? So in these kind of questions, the main thing would be to try and negate out or look at each of them and then say whether this is true or not. And then the least true option would be the one which will be the answer. So not mention a research question or topic in the introduction. We can live with that. Stray away from the question and discussion. Would you be writing an essay when you have defined a topic as, say, studying the reasons for dementia, but you're talking about something else? Would you stray away from the question and discussion? Probably this is also, an option. Not providing references. Now, if you're writing something, if you're producing something which is all your own work, sometimes it is the case you paraphrase and you are, then in those cases, you don't refer or reference your work. So in this case, what you do is you create what is called a bibliography, right? A bibliography is the list of sources that you have looked at for collecting that data and information and writing it in your own words. Let me ask you this interesting question. How many of you know what is the difference between bibliography and references? Or what is bibliography? Do you know the subtle difference between the two? What is bibliography and what is referencing? What is the difference between the two?
I think, sir, by Cynthia, bibliography has to do with the person. You are writing about yourself. While referencing, you're writing about another person, sir.
So what you've said is, I'll partly rephrase. When you look at referencing, you're actually using somebody else's work, and that is why you need to reference or cite to say that this is this person's work, because you have not created that piece of work or you have not written that piece of work. So you have to reference it. That means it's a reference wherein you're using that source of information, but because you're using that source of information which has not been produced by you, that is where you need to give credit, and hence you would do the process what is called referencing. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So referencing would be when you're using somebody else's work, even if you've read it, seen it, and you're going to then write it in your own report, essay, research, whatever it is, and you have to give credit to it because you have not produced it. So when you give credit, when you're writing it as a citation, you put it in inverted quotes. When you have to basically say that this is something that I'm using, which was published in this website or that particular journal, you're going to be accessing that information. That is where you are going to use and say that this is a reference, right? Now, what is bibliography? Bibliography is when you're looking at compiling work or collecting work or data essentially from lots of different sources. And this could be sources like books, articles, journals, website, government reports, published reports, which could be published or republished again in newspaper or magazines. Then you're looking at writing it as or compiling these bits of sources that you've referred to produce a bit of work or a report as bibliography. So bibliography tends to be lists of work that have been referenced or referred to while writing your own piece of report or paper or book or article or whatever it is. So it is referred to as list from which the data has been compiled. That's the difference. Reference is directly giving credit to somebody else's work when you bring it in your own work. Bibliography is list of sources from which the work has been compiled, and you might necessarily not reference it, but you might paraphrase it. That means you write it in your own words, and then you produce that report. Then in those cases, you don't need to reference your work. You have to submit at the end of your work a list of sources, and that would be called bibliography. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'll give you a simple example. Where do you see both of these being used in assignments? Sometimes what will happen is when you write your report or you write your assignment, you're going to refer work from books, articles, journals, and website. And you will chronologically arrange them, starting with the books, which always come first. Then you go to articles, or then you go to journals, then you come to articles, and then you come to website. Now, if you have all the 4 types of these lists in your assignment or in your report, then you will give it a heading called bibliography. Is that okay? Because you're listing down all the sources from which you have taken or referenced the work from. And they could be books, journals, articles, and website. Even if you have 2 of them, you will use the word bibliography as heading. But if you're only referencing it from websites or only from one particular type of source like articles in journals or books, then in those cases, if your work predominantly consists of citations and paraphrasing, which is still not altering the meaning, changing the meaning of the text or research which has been published, but bringing it in your report, then in those cases you would use the word references as a heading. Now, I'll show you the difference here. If I, for example, click on references on the Word document, and then I click, assuming I was using this as a reference, like this particular quiz, I have, say, for example, referenced it from a publication called Sage Publishing, because these are questions which I have not produced, for example, and the publisher is Sage Publishing. And here, the author, which is primarily, who has created these questions, is Catherine Delve Yates. Now, if I have to give reference of this quiz, which has been created towards the end, just to give you an idea, I would first use Microsoft Word and do the process of Harvard referencing. So what I do is there are lots of different referencing system. I would choose Harvard Anglia. Then I go into insert citation. And insert citation, I have taken this from what is the source, the website. Now in the website, who's the author of this particular quiz? So I have taken Catherine Delve Yates. She's the author of this question and the quiz that we are discussing. What is the page from this which it has been taken? Sage Publishing. That's the publisher or publisher's website. What is the URL? If I put the URL in here, what is the year? Are you able to see this? Are you all able to see this? So if I put it this way, are you able to see the referencing window?
Yes.
Okay, so if I do 2019, in which year I'm accessing it, 2022, month is October, and today's date is 10th. Now, when I click this, it will insert a reference. Now, assuming if I had taken these questions from 10 different websites, and then I had gone in and created a list of references towards the end of my document, when I click on bibliography as a tab, I have an option to choose that bibliography or works cited. So when I look at references, I would normally use works cited. And when I use different sources to compile this quiz, which is coming from 10 different websites, I'm writing the questions myself, then in this case, I will use bibliography, and that is how it will come across. This process is called Harvard referencing, because this is not something that I have created as a quiz. It has been created by somebody, and I need to be able to give reference and give credit to that particular person. So what I would do is I will put this as it is here, and this is referencing. And towards the end, what I will do is create a list of references from which this particular quiz has been essentially compiled. So in your case, in this case, I would mention the word bibliography because of the fact that this is something which is coming from a website, and I've used different sources to be able to write these questions for the quiz. So it is something which we have digressed, but I wanted to make sure that you are able to understand the difference between referencing and a difference between bibliography. Now, going back to the quiz again very quickly, which will help us conclude today's discussion. So the next question is, what should you never do while writing an essay? Stray away from question in the discussion, not providing references, provide quotes that are not related to the main topic, not mentioning the research topic in introduction. What you should never do. So we should never be going away from the research topic, which is in the introduction. We should not stray away from the question and discussion. We should always provide references. It is saying not. And we should provide quotes that are related to the main topic. Now, all the four are incorrect, to be honest. But which is the most incorrect that we should always avoid? Sometimes we have to look at an option wherein all the answers are incorrect. But which is the most incorrect answer in this case? All are incorrect, but which is the most incorrect answer? So what I would do in this case is, if we all agree, what we're going to do is, we are going to do a bit of ranking and go from the least to the acceptable option. So one, we should never look at straying away from the question in discussion, which will be the first one. Then the second one would be, we should not look at providing quotes which are not related to the topic. Then we should be not mentioning the research topic in the introduction. Then we should be looking at, last but not the least, not providing references. So if all the answers are correct, and if you have to rank them in particular order, then I would normally do this in this way, wherein I would say, okay, B would be the least that we need to do, then comes D, then comes A, and the last is C. Okay, the next one. What should you do to improve your academic writing style? Any ideas?
Be clear and concise. C.
Okay, does everybody agree with that answer? Any other different answers from anybody else? Okay, so if we look at what should you do to improve, always write in active voice, follow the same kind of sentence structure, be clear and concise, avoid repetition. So if I look at going through all the answers, this is the only one which makes sense. You don't do repetition when you're writing formally. Would you ask the same question 2 times in your letter or in a report that you're writing? You would not follow the same kind of sentence structure, because sometimes you have to build arguments, sometimes you have to be persuasive, you have to be critical, you have to make assumptions. So obviously your style and tone of writing might be different, which will alter your sentence structure. And then we can't always be writing in active, because sometimes when you bring in citations or when you quote somebody else's work in your report or in your essay or in your assignment, you would be using passive voice as well. So be concise and clear is the correct answer. Next one, an academic writing piece should follow a standard structure: an introduction, body, paragraphs, and a conclusion. Is this statement true or false? Anybody, is this statement structure true or false?
True, sir.
Does everybody agree? Okay, is everybody able to hear me? Is everybody able to hear me? Can you unmute your microphones and then also contribute? That'll be good. So does everybody agree with Rose that this is true?
It's true, sir.
All right, okay, that's great. Now, academic writing is personal. Is this true or false?
True.
Is academic writing personal?
It's false.
It's false. This is a simple one, because obviously we have to write in the third person's point of view. So academic writing cannot be personal. If we try and avoid being personal when we are writing academically, because you're writing in a formal style, you're not going to be using personal, you're not going to be personal in your style of writing, or your tone of writing is not going to be referencing to the aspects of personal. You're going to try and avoid being too exactly opposite. So you're not trying to be personal, you're going to be official. Now, is excessive repetition good or bad in academic writing?
It's
Is
bad.
this correct or false? True or false?
Bad.
It's bad.
Academic writing is personal.
So this, somebody said, is excessive repetition good or false? Is bad, good? Good only if you're used to emphasizing specific points to a reader, mostly good. Which one would you pick?
It's excessive repetition. I think it's C.
So in this case, I would probably choose the answer B and C, both.
Yeah, but
The reason I would
yeah,
say
because
good is
it's B
because,
and C.
yeah, B and C.
Yeah,
Where in the case would you see
yeah,
this as C? Where in this case would you see as C?
yeah.
So, for example, if you were
But are we allowed to?
go
Okay.
on, Jefferson.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if we are allowed to choose more than one option because the B and C appear to be more appropriate.
Yeah, in some cases, some questions, there is no right and wrong answer. As long as you can justify why it is being done in this case, also it can be more than one answer. Because this particular question, if that's where I asked, which situation would you do repetition? So if we have to do repetition, for example, if we read a poster, like a health and safety poster, it will always do repetition because it is going to try and tell you to avoid this, don't do this, this can
Yeah,
be this. So in those cases, the author, in this case, the health and safety executive, the government organization who produces this poster, always is trying to warn you about the dangers of things being done, badly. So in this case, they are using repetition. So they will say, this is bad, this is something you should not do, this is something you should not do because it can have this effect, or it can have it cause this damage. So repetition can be good only if you're trying to emphasize specific points to reader, right? When you buy a product or an appliance, some of the things which are suggested in do's and don'ts. In the don'ts, if you see, sometimes some of the bullet points are repeated. And maybe the language would be slightly different, but the meaning or the conveying that they are trying to do in terms of the don'ts tends to be the same. So if an appliance cannot be used, or overloaded, for example, if it was a washing machine, they will say, okay, do not overload the machine beyond 8 kgs in terms of weight. Then they might also say another sentence which will be emphasizing the same point, which is overloading the machine. That could create, stress on the motor, and the machine could break down. So what they're trying to do is emphasize a point that don't overload the machine. Give breaks between different cycles of running the machine. So in those cases, the motor requires some sort of rest in the middle so that it doesn't overheat. And again, it is talking about or referencing to the idea of overloading. So sometimes you have to emphasize on a specific point to the reader, and in those cases, repetition is required to be done. But generally speaking, repetition in the form of academic writing is not considered a good practice. It is a bad practice. So if you repeat words, if you make the same arguments again and they are out of context, or they do not relate to the topic and they seem that they are out of context, and in that case, generally what you're doing is you're repeating something which is going to irritate the reader or your audience and will also dissuade them from reading the entire report or your assignment. So academic in repetition and academic writing is generally considered not a good practice. But it can be done, but in certain situations or circumstances wherein you're trying to emphasize certain points to or specific or important points to your audience or to your reader. Is that okay? Now,
Yes, sir.
yes.
good. Now, this brings us to the end of today's session. So I'd like to summarize what we need to do in terms of ensuring that you are able to produce an academic piece of report for learning outcome 5. So let's look at this holistically in terms of all the 3-4 things that we want to do on the screen. So let me share the screen, and I want to bring all the 3 things together. So we have this research proposal, and we have, so this is ARS LO5. So give me 1 second. Okay, now if I just share my screen for a second, what I want to do is look at what we are going to concentrate on as far as the learning outcome 5 is concerned. So if I share the screen now, what I want to do is show the full screen. So here, if you look at, what we are looking at doing, there are 2-3 things in learning outcome 5 that we want to do. First, it says produce a final piece of academic work. Now, how would this final piece of academic work come about? It'll come about from the previous one wherein you've created a research proposal, and using that research proposal, or the report that you've downloaded from any of the 2 websites, Health Foundation and the NHS website, depending on the topic, you fill this format up. That will basically provide a research proposal completing task 4 of this unit. And in task 5, which is what we are discussing today, what you then do is referencing that report which you have downloaded, the 10, 15, 20 pages report, 5-page report, whatever topic you've chosen. Now that report you have to summarize and paraphrase, basically using the process of paraphrasing and academic writing. You have to summarize that into a small mini research project of 200 to 250 words. And that mini research project that you create would be the learning outcome 5, which is producing an academic piece of work, which is called research report. And this research report will have 5 headings. Number 1, this will have introduction. It will have aims and objectives. It will have a bit of research methodology. It will have your literature review, which are predominantly going to be sources from which you've collected the data. So I'll put it this way. You'll have research methodology. And then you will draw conclusions on that piece of research which you have downloaded from the report. And then towards the end, you will write ethical considerations. In fact, this could be a part of your literature review. And then towards the end, you're doing your conclusion. So when you produce this report would essentially be under these 5 broad headings. For introduction, you're writing 30 to 50 words. For aims and objectives, it's just going to be 2 bullet points, which are the 2 main objectives. Don't look at taking too many objectives. Here, you're going to be summarizing in 50 to 75 words, the main points of review of the literature that you are reading from. So basically, this is being read from the downloaded report. Ethical considerations. What are ethical considerations? Limitations for carrying out the research. Maybe the funds were restricted. The participants did not, maybe fully answer the questionnaires. What could be the considerations which are going to be limitations is what you need to look at. And then research methodology, you're going to talk about primary or secondary, but here we are more focused on looking at doing secondary research. And then conclusions would be again 30 to 40 words, 30 to 50 words or 40 words, which is basically, summarizing nicely in terms of what have you concluded by reading that report. So literature review is 75, 50 words. Your ethical consideration, maybe roughly 20 to 30 words, 2 or 3 bullet points essentially, which are related to your topic. And then essentially, you're looking at compiling references or bibliography towards the end, which should be PHY, what's wrong with me today? So PHY, which should be at least 6 sources from which the information is being, when I say information, what I mean by that is report is being compiled or written. And that would essentially complete learning outcome 5. So minimum, I would say 150 words, maximum, I would say 250 words is what you will need to write to be able to achieve, learning outcome 5. Okay. And then this bit in terms of the article is this particular research proposal is on Moodle. You should be able to access this. The presentation slides are on Moodle. You should be able to access this. And what we are looking at is on a very pessimistic basis, 150 to 200 words, on a maximum basis, 250 to 300 words. Maximum is what you need to be able to write to evidence that you have understood what is and how it is to produce and write an academic piece of report using a research report that you have downloaded from the websites which are given here, the Health Foundation and the NHS England and Wales NHS website. Any questions for today's session? Any other doubts or any queries in today's session? Okay, so if there are no doubts or no queries for today's session, we'll end the session here today, and then we'll meet up tomorrow to discuss the learning outcome 6, which is the last learning outcome of this particular unit, and that would help us, hopefully complete this particular unit tomorrow. So until
Please,
tomorrow,
is my question. I can't still differentiate between biography and reference. Please, I need more enlightenment.
All right, okay. So Ambrose, in this case, what we're looking at is how do you differentiate and when do you use the term bibliography and when do you use the term, references? So there is a subtle difference between how these two are used. So when we talk about references, we talk about references when you're looking at primarily citing some work from a third party. So when you look at references, you are looking at maybe quoting somebody else's work in your report. You're trying to bring in work as direct reference or citations. And that would generally be, when you need to write reference, that means you're looking at using somebody else's work, a publisher, an author, a creator, which has primarily produced something which has been backed up and published. You are trying to use that work and reference to it is being done by giving credit to that person, author, publisher, your report. That would be termed as references. So when you do the referencing, you have to ensure that you are doing it correctly in terms of including the date, the source, and when it was published and how it was published. And this is generally done in the case of referencing. But when you read something or when you refer to something and you have to compile a list of sources from which you have gathered this information, and you're now looking at reproducing or publishing this information in your own words, sometimes referred to as paraphrasing, then in those cases, what you need to do is towards the end of your report, you need to list down the sources from which this information is, and that tends to be what is termed as bibliography. Now, bibliography can be a combination of sources. It can be books, journals, articles, website, existing published reports, common reports, republished reports like newspapers, or specific reports like the annual journal report. So it could be a combination of all these sources from which you've gathered the information, and you chronologically list that information as books, journals, articles, websites, and others, or miscellaneous. And in those cases, you term it as list of sources from which you got this information, and that is termed as bibliography. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. Any other questions? Anybody else? Any other queries? Any other queries? Anybody? Okay, so what I would suggest is there are 1 or 2 handouts which I'm going to upload along with the presentation, which is already there. These handouts are going to be specifically focused on academic writing, which will explain, what are the things that you need to incorporate and keep in mind when you're producing this academic piece of report for Learning Outcome 5 that we've covered today. So go through that handout, and that would be useful for you to understand how do we look at doing academic writing. And I will see you in the session tomorrow. So until then, take care, and thanks so much for joining. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Okay, sir. Have a
Bye.
nice day.